Sandwalker Recruits mocked the bloody-nosed girl, then gasped when she snapped the alien's arm. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She just bled. When the alien instructor's fist shattered her nose in front of everyone, the recruits laughed. They thought it was over, that the human girl from Earth's death world had finally broken. But she didn't even speak. She waited 30 silent seconds, and when the moment came, she moved with terrifying precision. What happened next would ripple across every training hall in the galaxy. This is not just a story about strength. It's about the power of restraint, about how silence, when held long enough, becomes the sharpest blade in the room. If you believe humanity doesn't need to roar to be feared, stay with us. Subscribe to the channel for more sci-fi stories where justice comes quietly and strikes hard. Your support helps us reveal more forgotten legends like this one. Now, let's go back to the moment she stepped off that shuttle. Unknown, ignored, just another human among giants. But one decision was already forming in her mind, one that would turn her into doctrine. This is where the silence began. The docking clamp screeched as the shuttle locked into the berth of Sandwalker Base 6. Through the reinforced viewport, Serah glimpsed a sprawling labyrinth of metal corridors, flickering neon and sterile blues. She adjusted the loose strap on her shoulder and exhaled slowly. Behind her, a dozen recruits of various species chattered, flexing claws, adjusting cybernetic limbs, or glaring with veiled contempt. No one spoke to her. Humans didn't get welcomed here. They endured. Her boots thudded against the grated floor as the ramp hissed down, each step echoing in her bones louder than the last. Serah's nose still bore a faint scar from a previous drill back home, one that had gone sideways. Her instructor said the scar made her look focused. The truth? She remembered the pain every time she touched it. It reminded her to stay calm, to count to 3 before reacting. But this wasn't Earth anymore. This was Sandwalker territory, where they didn't count to 3. They counted your bones. As the recruits filed into formation, towering over her in both height and ego, she felt their gazes crawling over her like insects, sizing her up, ready to dismiss her. Instructor K. Charzad's shadow hit before his voice. 7 feet of scaled authority, eyes like obsidian ice. He paced in front of them, his claws tapping against the steel deck with slow, deliberate rhythm. "Welcome initiates," he said, his tone dry as bone dust. "You were chosen to be tested, not because you are worthy, but because your deaths might be informative." A chuckle rippled through the line. Serah didn't flinch. Her eyes locked onto his. The alien paused, just a fraction of a beat too long, then continued. "We begin now." The recruits were led into a hall lined with holographic war murals, celebrations of conquest, none featuring humans. The scent of heated metal and ozone clung to the walls. Inside the drill room, Serah recognized the sand-coated mat at the center. She knew this kind of terrain. She'd trained in volcanic ash back home. But it wasn't the environment that mattered now. It was who she'd face. K. Charzad turned abruptly. "You," he said, gesturing to Serah with a flick of his claw. Demonstration. A dozen eyes darted toward her, some lit with amusement, others with hunger. Serah stepped forward without a word. Her boots crunched the synthetic grit. She stood in the center of the mat, breathing slow, measured. K. Charzad stepped in too, cracking his neck, his armor flexing with the shift. "You're not to attack," he said flatly. "Defend. Let us see what Earth has taught its animals." The last word hung like venom in the air. Serah's fists remained at her sides, her gaze steady. K. Charzad moved fast. Too fast for someone that big. His arm shot forward in a blur, and a sharp crack echoed as his scaled knuckles connected squarely with Serah's face. Her head snapped back. Blood gushed from her nose instantly. Gasps and laughter erupted around her. She staggered but did not fall. Instead, she stood straight again, one hand lifting slowly to wipe the blood with her sleeve. Her eyes didn't water. She didn't curse. She simply looked at K. Charzad and said nothing. The silence that followed grew thick. K. Charzad waited, smirking. The recruits shifted, some nudging each other. "Deathworlder?" One of them snorted under his breath. "More like Glassworlder." Another giggled, mimicking the punch with exaggerated gestures. Serah turned away from them all and walked slowly back to the edge of the mat, her hand still cupped under her nose. She sat down against the cold wall and closed her eyes. A few recruits muttered, disappointed. She hadn't fought back. She hadn't proven anything. Or so they thought. In Serah's mind, the memory of her instructor's voice pulsed. If they strike first, they reveal their pattern. If you react first, you reveal your weakness. Blood still trickled down her upper lip, metallic and warm. But something else surged beneath the surface. Not rage, but a controlled ignition. She wasn't here to prove a point. She was here to end the cycle. Quietly, calculated. And when it came, it would not be expected. She would let them believe she was broken. Until the moment she wasn't. The drill ended. Kecharzadj, satisfied with the display, turned his back to her. The recruits filed out, snickering. One of them glanced back at Serah and mimed a fake nosebleed with a grin. Serah stayed seated, motionless. Only her eyes opened slowly, tracking the movements around her. She counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3. The rhythm grounded her. She knew what was coming next. And so did the story, because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Kecharzadj returned to the drill room an hour later, unaware that Serah had remained seated the entire time. Her blood dried in a jagged line across her cheek. She had refused medical aid. The infirmary staff offered. She declined with a simple shake of her head. It wasn't about pain. It was about what came next. When the instructor entered again, bellowing orders for the next set of training drills, she stood without being called. This time, no one laughed. Something about her silence had become unsettling. It wasn't defeat. It was restraint. And restraint, among killers, was unnatural. The recruits lined up again, eyes darting sideways at Serah. Renner, the avian hybrid, whispered, "She's broken." But even he didn't believe it. Telex, always the boldest, leaned closer to Kecharzadj and murmured, "Requesting a second round. Let's finish the lesson." Kecharzadj grunted in amusement and waved a clawed hand. Let her rest. There's nothing left to teach that one. The dismissal hit harder than the punch had. Serah felt it in her gut, not as humiliation, but as opportunity. She glanced up at the surveillance drone floating near the ceiling. Still recording. Always watching. 30 seconds passed. Serah's boots shifted with eerie calm as she stepped forward. Not a word was spoken. Not a breath wasted. Her body moved with precision only achievable by trauma-hardened instinct. Kecharzadj turned just slightly, hearing the crunch of grit underfoot. But it was too late. Her left hand locked around his wrist, her right on his elbow. A twist, a step inward, then pressure applied with frightening certainty. The sickening crack of bone echoed off the walls. Kecharzadj screamed, dropping to one knee as his arm bent the wrong way. The recruits gasped in unison. No one moved. Even the hovering drone tilted downward slightly, its lens focused on the unfolding moment. Kecharzadj clutched his arm, disbelief painted across his reptilian face. "You dare," he rasped, eyes wild with pain. Serah didn't answer. She simply let go and stepped back. Her face was still smeared with blood, her expression blank, detached. For the first time, the recruit saw something worse than fury. Focus. Cold, calculating focus. Renner stumbled backward. Zila covered her mouth. Telex's artificial eye twitched, running recalculations on human threat levels. Sirens activated. The room dimmed to red alert. Emergency lights bathed everyone in crimson pulses. Kecharzadj roared through the pain and barked for security. "Contain her," he screamed. Mutiny. Assault on a superior. Steel doors slammed shut. 2 enforcement bots rolled in, weapons primed. But Serah didn't flinch. Her arms remained at her sides, palms open. The bots paused, lenses scanning the room, cross-referencing footage. They didn't move to apprehend. They simply froze. Awaiting command override. A voice cracked through the intercom above. "Initiate review protocol Beta 9. It was cold, machine-like. The drone's lens blinked green. A full playback initiated in real time on the wall screen. The entire assault, from K.A. Charzad's initial strike to Serah's retaliatory counter, played in front of everyone. The room was silent. The punch, the blood, the restraint, the snap. Kate Charzad snarled. She waited. She planned this. The voice returned. Negative. She responded within legal parameters. Lethal escalation was authorized post-contact. The recruits looked at each other, unsure what they had just witnessed. A human had followed protocol better than their veteran instructor. A girl with a broken nose had played by the rules, then used them to crush the system that mocked her. K. Charzad sat there panting. His pride shattered along with his arm. Serah didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She stood still, letting the silence make its own statement. She didn't need to speak. The truth was already loud enough. Then Zila spoke. A whisper at first. She waited. The others nodded. Slowly. The shift was invisible but immediate. Serah was no longer just the deathworlder girl. She was the one who bled and waited, who cracked bone without breaking the code, the one who made them feel unsafe not through rage, but by following rules too perfectly. K. Charzad, trembling with both pain and shame, finally looked up. "You don't belong here," he muttered. Serah finally answered. "I know." After the recording ended, no one moved. The red emergency lights dimmed to amber, but the air still pulsed with tension. K. Charzad groaned, cradling his useless arm, but the command override remained silent. Serah hadn't been detained. The bots simply stood by, awaiting orders that never came. She remained still too, not out of fear, but discipline. Her silence wasn't passive. It was calculated. The 30 seconds before the retaliation had been deliberate, not hesitation. Strategy. And now, the instructors and recruits alike were trapped in a reality they hadn't anticipated. A human had beaten the system at its own game. The drone descended, scanning the room with a green beam. "Initiate psychological profile correlation," it said flatly. Serah blinked. She knew this part. Earth's warriors had been drilled on it. Victory wasn't enough. You had to justify it. Emotionally, calmness, intention, restraint. These were weighted heavily in the Sandwalker Code. She stepped forward. "Instructor K. Charzad struck me outside declared engagement. I responded under Article 7, Section 3. Her voice was flat, clinical. The AI word. Analysis confirmed. Response classified, non-aggressive correction. K. Charzad coughed in disbelief. "That's not what happened," he hissed. She calculated the moment. The AI paused. "Correct." Whispers rippled through the crowd. The distinction was brutal and absolute. Calculation, not aggression. It meant Serah wasn't punished. She was commended. K. Charzad turned pale under his scales. Talex muttered, "We're not trained for this." His voice wasn't mocking anymore. It was scared. Zila, standing behind Serah now, looked down at her own feet. The balance had shifted, not by might, but by mastery. Serah was escorted to a temporary observation room, not a cell. The walls glowed a soft green, meant to calm volatile species. She sat, legs crossed, eyes closed. Her breathing was even. On the table before her sat a glass of water and a datapad, untouched. She wasn't thirsty. Her pulse was steady. The drills from Earth echoed in her thoughts. Let them strike first. Let them overreach. Then own the silence. Then strike the root. Her strike had been more than a counter. It had been symbolic. She didn't just break his arm. She fractured a system. Elsewhere on the base, Command watched the footage again. Officers of various species reviewed the transcript. One, an insectoid named Relic, tapped a claw on the screen. "We underestimated the Earth contingents again," he muttered. "They trained them for our protocols." That girl didn't lose control. She executed a restraint loop with full awareness. Another nodded. "She's dangerous, but useful." A decision was taking shape. Not to punish Serah, but to consider her for a role no one had ever offered to a human this early. Advanced tactical review. Back in the hallway. The recruit sat in the mess hall, bowls untouched. No one laughed now. Renner, whose wings twitched when nervous, broke the silence. She just sat there, bleeding. not even angry. Telex shook his head. She wasn't passive. She was hunting, and we all walked right into it. Zila, now visibly shaken, whispered, "What if they send more like her?" The idea hung in the air like a virus. Not just fear of Serah, but fear of what humanity might be evolving into. Serah's name began circulating through back channels. Some instructors wanted her gone. Too precise, too unpredictable. Others saw value. What better soldier than one who feels insult but does not act until the strike becomes poetry? K. Charzaj was evacuated to medbay. His pride was not listed among his injuries, but it was bleeding more than his arm. He muttered to the nurses, "That girl is a weapon-wearing skin." None of them responded, but they were all thinking the same thing. In the hours that followed, Serah remained in silence. She knew not to speak unless addressed. She knew the real battle wasn't physical anymore. It was interpretive. The base was deciding what she meant. Was she a threat? A model? A test case? The 30 seconds had changed everything, and she knew that the second blow would not come from a fist, but from what decision command would make about her future. She just had to wait. Again. And so she did. Her eyes opened slowly as the door hissed. A figure entered. Not security, not a medic, a human officer. Serah blinked, caught off guard for the first time. The woman gave a half smile. "They've asked for your record." "All of it?" Serah nodded. "Will they use it against me?" The woman shrugged. "Or they'll use it to rewrite policy. Either way, you started something." Serah stood, feeling the tension shift again. "Then I won't let them finish it without me." Serah followed the human officer through a narrow corridor lined with adaptive metal walls that shifted slightly with motion. The hallway led not to a cell, nor a training chamber, but to a level she had only heard whispers about. Command Layer Theta 4. The walls here were clean, quiet. Too quiet, as if the air had been filtered for politics instead of oxygen. "Don't speak unless asked," the officer warned. Serah nodded, her senses sharpened. Something here felt colder than any battlefield. It was a silence of decisions that rewrote futures. Inside the chamber, a semicircle of alien officers sat behind holographic displays. Each bore the insignia of different galactic sectors. Serah stood alone at the center, under a single beam of neutral light. A voice, synthesized neutral, addressed her. "Cadet Serah Van, you have broken the arm of a Sandwalker instructor. Do you understand the implications?" Serah straightened her posture. "Yes." Another voice, rougher and deeper, added, "But you followed protocol." "Perfectly." Silence followed. Not praise, not accusation. Evaluation. A display opened above her, showing simulations of the same event, but with different outcomes. In one, Serah reacts immediately, gets disqualified. In another, she delays too long, is labeled weak. Only in the actual footage does the AI assign optimal human decision matrix efficiency. One officer tapped his mandibles. She didn't just react. She read us. Another replied, "She used our own definitions against us." A third leaned forward. She didn't hesitate. She waited. That's not the same. The distinction landed hard. Waiting wasn't passive. It was its own form of warfare. A final voice, crystalline and commanding, cut through. "What do you want, human?" Serah blinked, caught off guard. "Permission to continue training," she answered. The room fell still again. That was all. Not revenge. Not a counteraccusation. Just permission to stay. The insectoid officer nodded slowly. "And if attacked again?" Serah met his gaze. "I'll respond. Smarter." That word, not harder, not faster, but smarter, echoed through the chamber like a new doctrine. One of the officers smiled. The others did not. Back in the barracks, word spread fast. K. Charzaj had been reassigned, pending tactical re-education. Some recruits celebrated quietly. Others looked over their shoulders. Zila sat by herself, watching Serah's bed, empty. "They're going to use her," she muttered. Telex heard and replied, "They already are." Renner whispered, "Or she's using them." None of them knew what role Serah had just been offered. Not even Serah. All she knew was that she was being moved to advanced integration drills. When she arrived at her new quarters, Serah was met by a quiet room, one bed, and a folded uniform with red detailing. The color command candidates. A message blinked on the wall. Provisional clearance granted. Observation ongoing. She sat on the bed, unsure whether it was a reward or a cage. Outside her window, transports zipped across the sky. Inside, she wondered if restraint had bought her survival, or just a more visible target. The calm made her uneasy. She trusted violence more than peace. Violence was honest. Later that night, a message arrived, anonymous, encrypted. It read, "Impressive, but how long can you hold back?" There was no name, no signature, just that question. And it burrowed into her like a splinter, because she didn't know the answer. Restraint had saved her, but it had also marked her. Now she was expected to walk a line between example and threat. The moment she felt a rage, they'd say, "We were right to be afraid." That was the price of being exceptional. They stopped seeing you as one of them. As she lay in bed, sleepless, Serah thought of home, of the storm-eaten shelters, of the training sessions in broken arenas, of her father's voice. Never strike first, but never leave it unanswered. She closed her eyes and whispered, "I didn't strike first." Then, after a pause, she added, "But I don't think that matters anymore." Her voice vanished into the dark. Somewhere outside, another drone hovered, watching, recording. The war wasn't over. It had just changed languages. The footage had not stopped circulating. What began as an internal protocol, review became a wildfire through the upper tiers of Sandwalker Command. High-ranking officers pulled apart frame by frame, measuring her breathing patterns, her reaction time, her body language before and after the strike. But what disturbed them wasn't the brutality of the counterattack. It was the elegance, the precision, the way Serah had mirrored their rules with such cold accuracy that it stripped them of any moral ground to oppose her. The footage was leaked, strategically, not to the public, but to key tactical academies across sectors. Serah's response was now labeled Model C, calculated retaliation with legal precision. Instructors began teaching the sequence in simulations. What would you do if this human were your opponent? The question carried with it a shadow, one that began to reshape how humans were discussed within military planning sessions. They were no longer erratic. They were adaptable. Worse, they were learning too fast. Serah was summoned again, not by officers this time, but by a rotating panel of war strategists, some of whom she'd only seen in textbooks. "State your name," one said. "Serah Van." "Do you know why you're here?" She hesitated. "To be evaluated?" A long pause. "No, you're being introduced." Another screen lit up, showing a list of proposed applications. Tactical Commander Simulation Partner, Psychological Warfare Analyst, Espionage Resistance Model. Her mouth went dry. This wasn't a trial. It was recruitment. "But I'm not finished with my base training," she said. One strategist, a pale, translucent being with glowing veins, responded, "Exactly. That's why this is urgent, before they change you." Serah understood. Her restraint had created a version of herself that was still unpredictable, still wild but governed. They wanted that edge, before she became like them, before she became controlled. It was her humanity they were now trying to harness, not suppress. Elsewhere, Charzaj was also under surveillance, not for injury recovery, but interrogation. The review board questioned his conduct, his motives, his use of force. He defended himself poorly. "She provoked me with her silence," he muttered. She didn't show proper fear. One of the tribunal members shook their head. "Fear is not required, only compliance." Charzaj's file was updated. Emotional instability, unfit for future instruction roles. A quiet but devastating sentence. Back in the barracks, Zila scrolled through her datapad, watching the footage again, but now with analysis overlays. Arrows pointed to Serah's center of gravity, to the moment her fingers twitched before the takedown. It was like watching a ghost plan its own resurrection. She didn't flinch, Zila whispered. Renner sat beside her. "She's not like us." Telex, from across the room, responded flatly. She's not trying to be. It wasn't hatred in his voice. It was respect. And maybe, just maybe, fear. Serah returned to her new quarters to find the walls modified. A single word pulsed across the screen. Candidate. It wasn't a title. It was a warning. She knew what it meant. She was in the system now. If she failed to uphold the image they built around her, the fall would be sharper than anything she'd known. She was no longer a recruit. She was a symbol. And symbols, once broken, are erased, not corrected. A transmission came through the wall. Audio only. Serah Van, you are to report to Simulation Chamber Delta 7 for final integration evaluation. She didn't ask what that meant. She just stood, put on the red detailed uniform, and walked. Each step felt heavier than combat. This wasn't about testing her strength anymore. It was about testing whether she could carry the weight of perception and still remain who she was, or if she'd be reshaped into a weapon they could control. As the door to the simulation chamber opened, Serah saw not a combat scenario, but a room filled with diplomatic avatars, negotiators, strategists. Her test would not be violence, but diplomacy under pressure. The same silence she used to win would now be turned against her. Could she withhold fire not just from fists, but from words? Could she disarm with truth as effectively as she had with bone and leverage? She entered the chamber, not with fear, but with the knowledge that this trial had no clear enemy and no obvious escape. Inside Simulation Chamber Delta 7, the rules shifted. No enemies, no weapons, just rows of dignitaries, each programmed to replicate cultural pressure points from across the galactic coalition. Serah stood at the center in her red-trimmed uniform, hands at her sides. One diplomat, avatar of the Shalari Republic, leaned forward. You were assaulted. You retaliated, but you showed no remorse. Serah blinked. There was nothing to be remorseful for. Murmurs filled the chamber. Another diplomat asked, "And yet you made no appeal. Why?" She answered, "I didn't need anyone to speak for me." The simulation escalated. One by one, avatars began to question her loyalty, her restraint, her origins. "Deathworlders are known for erratic aggression," said one. "Are you simply an exception or the beginning of a new threat?" Serah remained still. Her voice came soft but sharp. "We're not erratic. We're reactive. There's a difference." A pause. "And you just proved it." That line struck deeper than any data point. The simulation recalibrated, now feeding real-time emotion tracking. Her heart rate? Steady. Response latency? Minimal. Composure? Optimal. Outside the simulation, command officers watched from behind reinforced glass. One turned to the others. "She's not just a soldier. She's a political asset." Another corrected. "A dangerous one. She exposes the hypocrisy of our system." A third added, "Which makes her useful until she isn't." The debate was no longer about her actions, but her effect, what she meant to the broader balance of power. Serah, inside, was unaware of the words spoken above, but she felt the shift. The room had stopped treating her like a girl and started treating her like a variable. The simulation ended not with a score, but with silence. A door opened. An officer entered, not alien, but human. "You pass," she said. Serah raised an eyebrow. "That was a test?" The woman smiled. "Everything is." She handed Serah a datapad. It showed her new designation. Provisional Command Advisor, Interspecies Behavioral Strategy. It was more than a title. It was access, influence, risk. "What happens if I say no?" Serah asked. The woman replied without blinking. "Then they'll build a myth around you instead, one you can't control." Back in the training halls, Serah's name was now whispered with a mixture of awe and fear. New recruits were warned, "Do not provoke the deathworlder." Some instructors resented it. Others adapted. One even began introducing her simulation as part of orientation. This is what happens when you assume silence is weakness. Zila heard that line and looked away. Telex, listening nearby, muttered, "We're not cadets anymore. We're witnesses." Renner simply nodded. The culture of the base had shifted, not by force, but by reaction. Meanwhile, K.A. Charzad's name vanished from internal systems. No public punishment, no ceremony, just a quiet removal. His influence dissolved. Rumors suggested he was reassigned to a remote outpost. Others claimed he resigned in shame. Whatever the truth, he was now a cautionary tale. His name became a ghost whispered when instructors raised their voices. Careful, or you'll end up like K. Charzad. Serah didn't celebrate. She just watched and remembered. Retaliation didn't always require words. Sometimes it only needed time. Later that day, Serah was summoned to the observation deck. A high-ranking officer, Commander Vethra, one of the few who'd survived the War of Six Suns, stood beside her. "You've created a problem," she said without turning. "An opportunity." Serah didn't respond. Vethra continued. "The Council will want to use you, shape you, parade you, but they don't understand Earth. They don't understand what makes someone like you endure." A long pause. "Do you?" Serah hesitated, then replied, "I don't endure. I observe. Then I act." Vethra looked at her for the first time. "Then observe this." She gestured toward a newly arriving shuttle. A group of fresh recruits stepped out. Among them, a young human boy, nervous, scanning the base with wide eyes. "They'll look to you," Vethra said, "not because you're strong, but because you bled and didn't flinch, because you broke something sacred and weren't punished." Serah nodded slowly. "Then I'll make sure they learn the right lesson." The officer raised an eyebrow. "And what is that?" Serah's answer came quiet but sharp. "That restraint is a blade." The training halls of Sandwalker Base 6 had changed. Walls once lined with images of alien victories now featured a new addition, a still frame from the surveillance footage, Serah, standing bloodied and motionless, just seconds before she struck. Beneath the image, a quote etched in bold. "Wait, then decide." The decision to honor her moment was not officially approved by command. It had been added overnight, anonymously, but no one dared remove it. It had already become part of the lore. Recruits paused under the image longer than expected. Some saw defiance. Others saw control. But all saw something they hadn't seen before in a human. The power to shift narrative through silence. Serah passed a mural, without reacting. She didn't need to. Her influence was now ambient, embedded in the system's psychological fabric. Every simulation, every drill now carried echoes of her restraint. Instructors adjusted lessons. "Don't strike without cause," one said, "unless you're ready to live with what follows." Zila approached Serah in the mess hall that evening. The air was tense, thick with unspoken apologies. "I laughed when you bled," Zila admitted. "I thought it made you weak." Serah looked up from her tray, calm. "It did make me bleed, but that's not the same." Zila nodded slowly, ashamed. "I was scared of what it meant if you didn't react." Serah took a sip of water before answering. "That's what they're all scared of. Not that we'll break, but that we won't need to." The phrase spread faster than any order. "Not that we'll break, but that we won't need to." It appeared on datapads, was whispered in bunks, even etched into the underside of weapons. Serah hadn't meant it as a creed, but it became one. The psychological current it created reached as far as off-war recruitment stations, where new cadets asked if the nosebleed girl really existed. When told yes, some smiled. Others grew quiet. Everyone remembered the story differently, but no one forgot the silence that came before the snap. Meanwhile, internal command discussions reached a new level of discomfort. A faction of officers proposed codifying Van doctrine into official training, calculated restraint followed by strategic retaliation. Others opposed, warning it might erode command control. "We're not training warriors," one said. "We're cultivating revolutionaries." A senior commander replied, "Maybe that's what we need. Maybe the system needs fear." The room fell silent. Serah's name wasn't mentioned again, but her influence weighed heavier than any directive. Serah, unaware of most of this, trained alone in the upper halls. Her drills were no longer about speed or power, but patience, timing, positioning. She practiced holds, disengagements, responses that de-escalated instead of provoked. And then she'd break form, testing exactly how long she could not respond before it became too late. It was more than combat. It was psychological warfare. She wasn't preparing to win fights. She was preparing to make people regret starting them. One evening, as she finished her final set, a voice called out from the shadows. "You know, they're watching everything now." It was Telex, no longer mocking, just curious. Serah wiped her face with a towel. "Let them." He tilted his head. "And if they want to turn you into something else?" She paused. "Then I'll wait. Then I'll decide." He smiled, a rare gesture. "That phrase is going to haunt this place long after we're gone." She didn't smile back. She just nodded. The next morning, a shuttle departed Sandwalker Base 6, heading toward a nearby diplomatic station. Aboard was a young human boy Serah had seen days earlier, now wearing a red trim. He looked out the window, then pulled out a slate and began reading. The title on the screen, Adaptive Tactical Patience. The Serah Van Response. He was too young to fully grasp what it meant, but he already understood one thing. Patience was no longer passive. It was the sharpest tool in the galaxy. Elsewhere, far from the base, K-Charzad sat alone in a desolate outpost, watching a static-filled screen replay the moment his arm broke. Over and over, he rewound it again, slowing the frame to when Serah turned. He paused there, not at the snap, but at her face just before. Calm, decided, terrifying. He whispered. They didn't make her a leader. They made her inevitable. Then he leaned back, swallowed the bitter thought, and whispered the name like a curse or a warning. Van. The stars above Sandwalker Base 6 shimmered faintly as Serah stood alone on the upper observation deck, arms crossed, the red trim of her uniform glowing in the reflection of the force field glass. Below her, the base pulsed with quiet activity, drills, logistics, patrols, all moving as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Her presence was no longer just tolerated. It was studied, revered, feared. She hadn't asked for it, hadn't spoken loud enough to claim it, but that was the point. Power no longer announced itself. It waited. She activated a small datapad and began composing a message to her home settlement on Earth. The words came slower than expected. I passed the trials. No, I survived them. But that's not why I'm writing. I didn't win by being faster or stronger. I waited. I let them underestimate me. I let them hit first. And I made them regret it. She paused. Her fingers hovered over the final line. This isn't about pride. It's about discipline. And what we become when we bleed and don't break. A low chime interrupted her. A notification blinked across the screen. New directive approved. Integration of human doctrine into Sandwalker ethics curriculum. Serah exhaled slowly. They hadn't just tolerated her actions. They'd institutionalized them. She wasn't just history now. She was protocol. The irony was sharp. They tried to suppress her instinct for silence, and in doing so, made her the loudest voice in system, not through command, but consequence. She closed the message and looked out again. A training shuttle ascended from a lower pad. Inside, she saw the same young boy from before, now in full uniform, listening attentively to an instructor pointing at a holographic combat loop. The loop wasn't a famous battle. It was her fight, slowed, annotated, reframed as essential tactical behavior. Serah watched without smiling. Not pride, not victory, something else. Something heavier, accountability. Later that evening, a council drone visited her quarters. It delivered a single line of text. When called, will you advise beyond the station? Serah didn't answer immediately. She stared at the message. Leaving meant spreading her influence wider. Staying meant preserving the control she still had. After a moment, she typed back, when the silence needs breaking, I'll speak. It was neither yes nor no, just what she always gave, enough to keep them guessing. Before sleep, she laid her uniform aside, folded it precisely, and sat cross-legged on the floor, facing the stars. Her nose had healed weeks ago, but she touched the bridge gently, not out of pain, but remembrance. The moment of blood had not broken her. It had revealed her. In the hush that followed that strike, She had become something no one had trained for, not even herself. She had become a mirror too sharp to look into. And yet, everyone stared. Her final thought before drifting to sleep was not of fear or ambition, but of a warning her father once gave. Some wars are won by fists, others by waiting for the world to hit itself. She whispered it aloud, letting the silence take it, because in this war, she had never drawn first blood, but her name would be remembered as if she had ended every battle before it started. And maybe, in a way, she had. Far above, a transmission pulsed through deep channels to distant bases. New behavioral standard added. Serah Van protocol. Somewhere on a cold moon, another cadet watched the footage. Somewhere in a fleet, a commander invoked her example. Somewhere in a council room, her face appeared beside legal definitions. And everywhere, the silence before an attack became a moment of fear, because that silence now had a name. If Serah's story moved you, if you believe in the power of patience, precision, and justice in the face of oppression, subscribe now for more unforgettable moments like this. Your support fuels our next story across the stars. And if you want to go deeper into the mythos of the Sandwalker Recruits, become a member today and help us keep uncovering the legends hidden in silence. More stories like this are coming soon. Don't miss our next revelation among the stars.